and hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our live stream event. Today we are talking about suicide, how many more. And I'm joined today by Jolene King and Karen Griffith. They're going to introduce themselves later. And while we get ready for them, just tell us where you're joining from, where you're logging in from today and what the weather is like. And my name is Gail Withers. For those of you who do not know me, I am the lead training consultant at Envision Training Solutions. When I'm not creating or facilitating training workshops, I am here hosting the tough conversations as we try to break the stigmas. So, welcome everybody. Jolene, can you go first? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
I'm Jolene King. I'm occupational psychologist and principal consultant of 246 King Consulting. I'm also a mental health specialist. So the work that I do at 246 King Consulting is work specifically with employee health and well-being, mental health training, absence management. Now, why I'm here is that I've lost family members and loved ones to suicide, so I am also a suicide prevention advocate as well.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you, Karen. Welcome and tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Thank you so much, Gail, for having me here. My name is Kerren Griffith. I am a mental health professional. Currently, I work in a drug rehabilitation center as an addictions counselor. I'm working with adult males and females suffering with substance abuse issues and also mental health challenges as well. My background is in mental health counseling and psychology. I've had the opportunity to work with adults in a number of different populations. And I have had the opportunity to work with Gail prior, addressing this
Mhm.
very important topic of suicide. And, it's always something that keeps coming up. And so this is a really important conversation to be having because it does affect persons and affect people in many more ways than one. So I'm excited to be here to have this really important conversation and definitely look forward to the discussion that we're going to have today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, ladies. And Jolene, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us, because I'm sure a lot of people really do not know, what is suicide? If I was to ask you, can you define suicide for us and tell us what it really is? Could you give us?
Of course, suicide is the intentional and voluntary act of killing oneself. It is the end result of a culmination of circumstances. People don't wake up one day and decide to take their own lives. It is just the end result of a combination of factors, which Karen will go into. However, this is a very sensitive topic for me, really, and it hurts to talk about. But and I don't say people commit suicide because up until the 1960s, suicide was considered a criminal act. I don't know who they were going to prosecute because the person is already deceased. So, if I needed to define it, I would say that it is the act of intentionally and voluntarily killing oneself.
Thank you very much for that. And Karen, if I can go over to you, how prevalent is suicide in the Caribbean and like what are the stats? Not only for the Caribbean, but especially for Barbados, because I know that, recently we've been having these suicides one after the other, and it's such a cause for concern.
Absolutely, it is a cause for concern. And as you correctly said, in Barbados, there seems to be this increasing trend of suicides in the island. So I was able to do some research because I wanted to really get a general understanding of what's the prevalence of suicide in the Caribbean region. So I was able to find some statistics by the World Health Organization. I'm just going to go through them briefly. It mentions just a few Caribbean countries, but I also was able to find some specific to Barbados. So, according to the World Health Organization, their data suggests that there is a suicide rate of 12 per 100,000 persons. And this is in the island of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad, actually, according to WHO, has the highest suicide rate in the Caribbean. And this is pretty much in line with another study that was done by Nicole, who reported a suicide rate of 13.6 per 100,000 persons in Trinidad and Tobago. So those figures are quite close. For St. Vincent and Puerto Rico, the suicide rates were 7.7 and 6.2 per 100,000 persons respectively. Unfortunately, they didn't have any information for Jamaica. I tried to find some of the more well-known Caribbean islands, but there wasn't any for Jamaica at the time. But there was an unpublished study that was done that noted the suicide rates in Jamaica varied between 1.8 and 2.7 per 100,000 persons, and this would have been between the period of 2002 to 2006. So that particular study was quite dated for Jamaica. What I also found too is the difference between males and females. Across the board in the Caribbean, they found that suicide was much higher among males as compared to females. And that's something that I've also noticed happening in Barbados. According to the WHO statistics, they said the rates for males were 3.6 to 5.2 per 100,000 persons, higher than that of females, which was zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.9 per 100,000 persons. Um, in the latest WHO data for Barbados, this was in 2020, the suicide deaths reached 2 or 0.07% of total deaths in Barbados. And that may seem like a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but when you look at the frequency at which it is happening now, you can certainly see that this is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in the island. I was also able to find an editorial written in the Barbados Advocate. This would have been a few years ago. Um, and the writer had made mention of a chapter done by David Lester on suicide in Barbados. This would have been a couple years back. I just want to bring it up to really just kind of highlight some things. This was between 1968 and 1988, and the rate of suicide then was 4.7 per 100,000. So this would have been a couple of years ago, right? And even though that at that time that was the rate, it was still higher among men than it was among women. Between 1975 and 1985, 48 men had committed suicide compared to 8 women. So that just goes to show that, among males, suicide tends to be more common compared to females, and this is just generally. All right. In terms of more recent years, between 2020 and 2021, the Barbados local media had recorded at least 5 cases of suicide, and this was just among males. Um, Within this year, as most people know, or for those who don't know, there has been an increase in suicide. At one point, it did seem as though there was a suicide per month, right? And that was certainly a worrying trend. By October last year, 2022, there were a total of 8 suicides for that year, and that was just up until October 2022. And 50% of those suicides were committed by persons that were in their 20s. I don't have information on whether they were male or female, but certainly of those 8 for that time period up until October last year, 50% of them were in their 20s. And if we're talking about just this year, you would see that the suicides that were reported, quite a number of them were done by persons, by young adults in their 20s as well. The start of July, if I could recall, there was a string of at least 3 suicides within the space of 2 weeks. And if I can recall correctly, there were two women and one male. But since that time, there were 2 other suspected cases of suicide. So that would have been just the start of July. We're now at the ending of July, which means that would have been about maybe what, five suicides, perhaps within the space of about 2 months or so. So it is a worrying trend. And this is why it's so important to have these conversations, because people are not managing well with their mental health. And sometimes, as Jolene correctly said, this is the end result. Persons just don't get up one day and decide to commit suicide. is usually a culmination of factors, and this typically is unfortunately one of the consequences when persons are not managing well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think it is a cause for concern, especially here in Barbados and, the Caribbean as well. Jolene, why is it so hard to talk about suicide? Like, why?
It's hard enough that we in the Caribbean and those of African descent, of any descent actually, will talk about mental health. Suicide is a taboo subject. There is a lot of stigma, there's a lot of shame and guilt. So that is why it is, and as I alluded to, up until the 60s, it was classed as a criminal act in the United Kingdom and probably in other nations of the world. There is a particular religious denomination that would refuse to bury people if the cause of death was suicide. So there is a lot of shame attached to this and a lack of understanding as well. People do not understand why someone who looks healthy, who looks fine, who quote unquote, there's nothing wrong with them, would take their own lives. You can't tell what's going on by just looking at someone. We're all carrying our own burdens, and there are a lot of people pre pandemic, during the pandemic, and post pandemic who are hanging on by a single thread. And it only takes one event to send someone over the edge. But we're not talking about it. We want to continue to that. These things aren't happening. And as a society, we are failing people because people are dying by their own hand. And as Karen and I know, suicide is preventable. Early intervention is critical to the prevention of someone making the decision irrationally, yes, but in their mind it is rational to take their own lives. So that's some of why it's so hard to talk about. And also it is painful, especially for those who've been left behind. To this day, I can't explain why my cousin chose to take his life. I can speculate, but he never left a note. He never said goodbye. He just took his life after having spent half of his life on substances. So, for a lot of people, it's the shame. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of disappointment, and people just don't want to talk about it because it's better to sweep it under the carpet. Is a family secret. There are people who have family members who died, and up to now, nobody said what they've died from. So the next generation just know that they had a family member who died. They don't know what they died from or how they died, and somebody would have manufactured a reason why they died. Oh, they had cancer, they had a heart attack. No, they didn't, though. They took their own life. So these are some of the reasons why it's so hard for us. And culturally, we don't talk about the things that we should talk about, and then we talk about the things we have no business talking about. Mental health, we need to talk about. Suicide, we need to talk about. Because the majority of people who die by suicide are men under the age of 45. It is the number four leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds across the world. Why are we losing young people? They have their whole lives ahead of them, but we're losing them because we don't want to talk about stress, we don't want to talk about depression, we don't want to talk about the difficult topics because everything is airy fairy, everything is all right. You cannot pray away negative feelings. So, culturally, we have a lot that we need to address, and I think that is part of it. And culturally, we don't believe in therapy either. Keep it in your family while you're talking out our business. So, that is another reason why we don't want to talk about suicide because we don't want to talk, period. As I said before, we like to talk about the things that we shouldn't be talking about, and the things we should be talking about, we don't talk about.
Pausing because somebody told me recently as I prepared for today, and I'm going to share what they said so I can get your feedback. that they see suicide as a permanent solution to a temporary issue.
It's not that straightforward.
Do you-
It's not that,
I don't think
yes,
so. I don't even
to
think the
a
person is
rational,
seeing it
listen,
as like that's okay for us black and white. I don't think it's that black and white.
Gail,
I don't think the thinking
to
is like that. What do you think? Both of
to a
you.
rational thinking person, that
Hmm.
may be the case. Someone who has suicide ideation or is making plans to take their life is not processing information in a rational way. They have got into a spiral of negative thinking. Therefore, that solution is the solution. They are they want to end the pain. And unless you have experienced that level of pain, you have no idea what it's like. Suicide ideation, 1 in 8 people in the world experiences suicide ideation at least once in their life. Not saying they're actually going to do something about it, but the thought has crossed their mind. And Karen has talked about the statistics. We are losing so many people by their own hand. They're not saying, "Oh, this is just temporary." Yeah, no, they have gotten, and it's been going on for months. It might have been going on for years. Do you know how much pain that is for somebody to endure? So unless they come out of that dark place, that negative space, that is their solution. That is their way out. That ends the pain. And something that I want people to be aware of, which we'll probably talk about later, there's a sense of euphoria and they're the happiest they've ever been just before the act occurs because they've made up their minds and they know that the pain is going to be over. So that 24 hours, 48 hours, if you're in contact with somebody and then you get news, they're like, but they seem all right. They were fine. Yeah, because they'd made up their minds. So pay attention. So I reject that notion, but it's well meaning for somebody who is rational thinking, but for someone who is in that space, it's not.
Yeah, well, thanks for clarifying. And I do remember somebody saying after there was a report of suicide, oh, but I saw that person yesterday, and we were talking and we were laughing. I would never have guessed. I didn't realize anything was going on, but then it kind of ties back to what you said. Their mind may have been made up, and yeah, I'm gonna do what I think is best for me to do. So, Karen, let's segue into now some of the risk factors for suicide. Like, what signs can we be looking for? Like, what do we tend to miss?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about the risk factors, but I just wanted to comment on the what Jolene was just saying in terms of persons thinking it's a permanent solution to a temporary issue that they're having. And I also too can understand why people would say that, but I think that in the person's mind, this as Jolene correctly said, this is the solution because if it wasn't, then it wouldn't be something that they would actually consider doing. So it's it's something that I think a lot of people might not really be able to understand unless you experience it yourself or are affected by it. But most definitely, I've heard that comment as well too. But I think that that's just it's easy to say something like that, but not. I don't think people really understand, the gravity of the emotions that a suicidal person is really going through, you know. But in terms of risk factors and what a risk factor is a condition or a characteristic that would make something more likely to occur or something more likely to happen. So while there's no single cause for suicide, there are a number of risk factors and warning signs that I'm going to just touch on briefly so persons can become aware of what might be some of these factors that may cause a person to want to commit suicide. So I kind of broke them down into different sections. There are health related risk factors, environmental related risk factors, and then there's also historically related risk factors as well. In terms of health and mental and health risk factors, certainly mental health conditions are some of the higher risk factors, particularly depression and anxiety, is one of the most frequent risk factors for persons who commit suicide, depression and anxiety. Followed by that is substance use disorder. What my research has found is that substance use problems is the second most frequent risk factors for suicidal behavior after depression. So for heavy drinkers or for persons who are using drugs, they're more likely than others to think about, plan, or commit suicide. Other mental health conditions like bipolar, schizophrenia, um, physical health conditions, even traumatic brain injury, these are things that can more than likely increase a person's risk for suicide. As far as environmental risk factors go, stressful life events. This could be like major life changes, like maybe a divorce, maybe some financial challenges a person might be having, other life transitions that may be stressful can all increase a person's risk for suicide. Um, Having access to weapons like firearms or drugs, um, relationship issues, unemployment, even exposure to another person's suicide. These are things that can increase a person's likelihood of wanting to think about or commit suicide. Historical risk factors would be like if a person has had previous suicide attempts, a family history of suicide, or childhood abuse, neglect, or trauma in some way, shape, or form. All of these are factors that can most certainly um, increase a person's risk for suicide. As far as warning signs go, there are a lot of different warning signs. Again, what I've done is I kind of group them into different headings. So these are things that a person should look out for if they're concerned that someone that they know may be suicidal. Um, Talking of what a person says. These are sometimes a lot of warning signs can be found in how a person is speaking. So they may talk about maybe feeling hopeless. They may talk about actually wanting to kill themselves. You should really take a person seriously if they're expressing thoughts of wanting to harm themselves. If they're saying things like they have no reason to live or they feel like if they're a burden to other persons. So these are the kind of top things that persons who may be feeling suicidal may exhibit. So you really want to pay attention to what a person is saying um, in terms of their behaviors. You may find that a person may all of a sudden start withdrawing or isolating, and maybe not being the usual self. Maybe they are not sleeping as they should, or they are not sleeping throughout the night, sleeping too much, or even sleeping too little. They may be aggressive, and it may just seem very like strange for that person's behavior. Um, they may also increase their use of substances. So you may know someone to be using, but if it is that you find that they're using quite a lot more, and maybe there may be other things going on. So maybe they may be having some financial challenges because these things can happen. It's not just one single thing. These things can happen as a combination of things. So the person may be going through some stressful situation at work, maybe having some financial issues, and now they're using more. They've increased their substance use. So these are all things that you really need to be mindful of and certainly, just pay attention to. Also, just pay attention to a person's mood, especially if you know or expect a person to be in a normal mood, so to speak. You may notice that they may be feeling a little bit more they may seem a bit more depressed. Their mood may be a little bit lower than usual. They may seem irritable. They may appear to have a loss of interest in things that they ordinarily would be interested in. Humiliation and shame are also some things to be mindful of. In terms of me working with clients here, relapse is often a big red flag because sometimes relapse can come with feelings of guilt and shame and disappointment. And depending on how long a person has been clean or sober, they may or may not be able to manage that split. And so these are things to be mindful of. And those are just some of the more important warning signs. But certainly, what a person is saying, just definitely listen to what people are saying. Be mindful of their behaviors, any changes in behavioral patterns that you know that this person isn't normally this
Mm-hmm.
low, and you can tell that they may be in a space. Definitely, those are things to look out for that I would say are some of the warning signs people should pay attention to.
Yeah, all very, very important. And I'm gonna ask Jolene to add her take now, because I know you're the occupational health person, like from work and an occupational perspective.
Before I talk the occupational side of things, there's another one that, with my conversations with people, they've highlighted to me, and I just want to
Mm-hmm.
flag it. It is sexuality and
Mm-hmm.
sexual orientation, and people who have not come out and who might be still confused about what their sexual identity is or preference, and also people who are still closeted, people who are being blackmailed. Because in some cases, with the younger ones, that is what has come out, that they have been getting blackmailed or threatened, and that has led to the depression and the act of suicide. So I just wanted to flag that before I talked about the work related factors. Now, high
Mm-hmm.
stress
Yeah.
occupations, police officers, fire officers, doctors, nurses, dentists, anything where there's high stress, that's a risk factor for suicide. Some more major life events, job loss, bankruptcy is a very big one. And with the cost of living and everything else relating to that, people are definitely having a negative financial well being right now. So that could lead to suicide. Um, some long term health factors, some were mentioned by Karen before, but cancers and HIV, AIDS, Parkinson's, anything that could affect somebody within their working life during their working years could be a stress factor. Now, there's a history of abuse. If it's a sexual assault victim, let's just call it rape. Sexual assault just makes it sound so tame. And also anything that could be happening within the workplace that is negatively affecting someone. So it could be bullying, racism, victimization, harassment. If it is oppressive and the individual is not getting any support from their line manager, employer, or anywhere else, that could take them in a downward spiral. So those are some of the work related risk factors. And we spoke about firearms in the home. Now, police officers are issued with a firearm. Chances are they may have another one. That might be in the home. And we know via research from the World Health Organization that death by firearms is the most common method used by men and women to take their lives.
Well, that is a serious thing. Where the firearm is there and available to be used, and I guess maybe like pills as well in terms of an overdose could be whatever I get my
That's
hands on. How does that
yeah.
work, Jolene?
That's one of the top five. So the top three are hanging. Sorry, we'll start with the firearms, hanging, and poisons.
Okay, those are
So
the
you know
top
your
3.
weed killers, the usuals, the gramoxones, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Those are in the top five. All painful ways of taking your life. So the
Yeah.
person saying, "Oh, it's just a you know temporary solution." No, somebody has to really be in a bad place to actually want to drink gramoxone.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And can you give us 3 tips, Jolene, for early intervention, especially in the workplace?
The line manager is very crucial to identification and early intervention because they're the person who interacts with the employee more than anybody else. It's about being
Mhm.
aware, paying attention. Karen talked about changes. There are changes in behavior. There are changes, people start to withdraw, look at dips in work performance, erratic behavior, absence. All of these things you need to look for and ask questions and listen, engage with the individual. That's how you find out. And be kind. And this is for everyone. Just be kind to each other because that is a way of letting people know. Because if you're kind to people, you have an open forum, people are likely to open to you and tell you what's going on, and you can signpost them to professional help because that is all you're doing. You're not a professional, you need to signpost people to help. And the next thing, organizations need to have an employee assistantship program, confidential service that is operating 24/7, that employees can use. It's part of an employee benefit they can use to discuss whatever is happening in their lives, and it should also be open to their families. And
Mhm.
that is at the company expense. And it
Mhm.
needs to be confidential. You should not be able to identify anyone who calls with any issue they've got. And
Mhm.
also tie in with the EAP other sources of well-being, health and well-being support. So have resources for financial well-being, offer, but of course find out what it is that people want. But there are things, the employee assistantship program is a given, that's a non-negotiable. But everything else, find out what people want, but make sure you're covering different aspects of their well-being: financial,
Mhm.
spiritual, social, psychological, mental, all of that. And that is
Mhm.
part of the early intervention. But that health and well-being agenda has to be part of the organizational strategy and has to be led by the leadership team. It has to
Mhm.
start from the top.
Yeah, I
So those are my
agree.
3 tips.
I'm gonna ask you for another tip. What do you think? I know that the focus was on anxiety recently. How do you see that? Like, you have a lot of people now who are anxious. They are afraid. They might be part of a mass layoff. They don't know what's going on in their lives right now. There might be a lot of upheaval and uncertainty. But I might say, Jolene, I'm so anxious. How would you, and I'm not normally an anxious person, would you pick that up as a sign per se? And I'm asking this because sometimes these signs in terms of a change in behavior may be so subtle, it
Mm.
might be easy to miss, and people may take being anxious for granted. Or everybody's anxious, everybody's afraid they might lose their job, everybody's afraid of something. But how is your anxiety affecting you and translating into something that might become more serious?
Well, our
Yeah, that's a
bodies
lot
are
to
full of,
unpack.
I'm going to break it down as best as I can. Now, the normal stress response for a human being is fight or flight. We have a hormone called cortisol.
Hmm.
If we are, and this is from when we started, a mammoth came, we had to decide, are we going to fight it or are we going to run from it? That is a fight or flight response. If a human being perceives danger, it is about how do we respond to that. Now, the problem with the stress and the anxiety is that if that cortisol has nowhere to go, then it builds up and it creates symptoms and signs that negatively impact on our physical and mental well-being. So, if somebody is saying they're anxious, we first need to determine, are they just feeling a bit uneasy, which is a temporary feeling, or are they actually anxious and there are degrees of anxiety? There's moderate, there is severe. There are some self-care tips that you can use. So it's all about identifying what are your symptoms and addressing those at the early stage. So it's about very much your self-care. But for the organization, if I'm pulling it back to an organizational level, if there's something going on, some sort of major change, people need to be communicated to. they, there needs to be open and honest dialogue to lessen the uncertainty, because there is nothing worse than a human being existing in a climate of uncertainty because we don't like it. Let's harken back to COVID. That was a time of uncertainty. The anxiety levels across the world shot through the roof. WHO is still gathering stats on how people have been affected, and every year the statistics are frightening. So where to start identifying the symptoms and dealing with those and making sure that people are practicing self-care, and if they need to, going to seeking professional help, whether that is through various forms of therapy. One could be cognitive behavior therapy or different types of therapy, but getting the professional help in the early stages so that that mild anxiety doesn't turn into moderate or severe, because by the time it's severe, chances are you need to be institutionalized. So
Okay,
that's my
and
response.
thank you very much, Karen. Can you give us three tips, especially as it relates to early intervention for substance abuse? Because I know that's your field.
Yes, and I thought Jolene gave some really useful tips as well. As far as persons who are dealing with substance use issues, I think one of the first things I would suggest as a tip is really for them to start to prioritize their healthy relationships. Connection is really, really important for persons in recovery or even persons suffering with suicidal ideation. So definitely prioritizing your healthy relationships, ensuring that you have a really solid support system of people around you so that you can reach out to those people when you are struggling. And that's, I think, really important. Once you have a core support system and you feel comfortable and you feel supported by that support system, then it really can help a person who may be struggling emotionally. What I would also say as well too for substance abusers, what we've come to find is that persons either get treatment for substance abuse or they get treatment for suicide ideations, and in most cases they can co-occur. So I think it's really important for persons to seek out treatment options that include a holistic approach to treatment so that it can address the substance abuse and any underlying issues that may be, you know, leading or creating the substance abuse issue. So I think that mental health and addiction services really need to increase the collaboration so that these issues are treated at the same time. People can find some sort of solution to the issues that they're dealing with. So definitely reaching out and having that support system, really prioritizing that and those healthy relationships and taking out a holistic treatment approach so that both of these issues can be addressed and it's not a one or the other issue that is being addressed. What I would say as a tip generally for persons, not even necessarily only substance abusers, but generally, um, check in with your people, check in with the people around you, just check in with them. We all have a role in preventing suicide, and I think Jolene said in the very beginning that suicide is preventable. So if you're aware of warning signs, and that's why it's so important to know what the warning signs are, you know, to just check in with persons every once in a while, just to make sure that persons are doing okay. And especially if you know that a person may be experiencing a difficult situation, that's also the time when you really should check in. So I think that those are some things that persons can and should do. And I think that those, if you can implement those things earlier, it can certainly and hopefully lead to a different outcome. So those would be my tips in general, and more specific to substance abusers.
Great. And before I go to my next question, I just wanted to highlight this comment from my friend Robert Berry. He says, often men are just told to suck it up, whatever it happens to be. Wow. Like that is a deep comment because it's so true.
Hmm.
What do you think about that, ladies? Does that kind of comment over
Oh
and over
yeah,
again contribute in any way?
it does. It absolutely does. Especially in,
Absolutely.
and I've gotten flack in talks that I have done for the Caribbean when I say the you see the rum shop culture. A
Mm-hmm.
man might be saying something to somebody and they just tell them drink a rum or something of that sort. Very trivial and glebe. And the next thing they go and buy weed clearly and they drink that. You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Men don't have those deep dive conversations with each other because it's uncomfortable. And as you said, whatever it happens to be, I don't know either. This is a serious matter. And it's not about sucking it up. It's so disrespectful to the pain that people might be going
Mm-hmm.
through. But
Yeah. And
you
whatever
know how I
it
feel
happens
about
to
you
be.
know how I feel about things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Karen, you want to comment before we move on?
Yes, I
Scary.
think that, yeah, this is something that you see all the time. And I think it is, a cultural thing, things that you learn, that men are supposed to be strong. They're not supposed to be emotional. So all the things that come with being emotional, they're really not expected to show. And I think that that's what keeps a lot of men suffering in silence. And it's
Mm-hmm.
quite unfortunate because men are human. We all have emotions. We all struggle, right? So it's unfortunately, I think, more of like what we learn from people in our lives and just like a cultural thing. So, men just generally don't talk about stuff that they're struggling with. And if that's what they grow up in their household seeing and learning to keep things to themselves, and it's unlikely that they're going to share about these things. But I think that it's also important to talk about the things that we're struggling with. And telling the person to suck it up is definitely not going to help it. It may be easy, but it's not going to help in the grand scheme of things. So, and I think that's why so many men are committing suicide. Because they don't have an outlet to really get things out and talk about the things that are truly bothering them. So they're less likely to seek out help. They're less likely to open up to other persons. And so again, that's the unfortunate end result. But it's certainly not useful, that comment, I think.
I agree. So, what is the one thing from both of you that you want our listeners to take away today? The one most important thing that if they don't remember anything else from today's conversation, Jolene, you want to go first?
I'm gonna try to condense this, but I don't know if it's
Yes,
just
please
one thing.
condense.
That's okay. A few sentences. It can
Yes.
happen to anyone. Suicide can impact anyone in any way because we all have mental health. Be kind
Hmm.
to yourself, be kind to others, show yourself some grace, and pay attention. When you ask someone how they are, actually pay attention to what they're saying and how they're saying it. We are our brothers and sisters' keeper. We are
Hmm.
failing each other because no one should be dying by their own hand.
Hmm. Hmm. So when you say, I guess what you're saying is when you ask me how I'm doing, don't be asking me and walking away before you
You
even
mean
get to
running
answer.
away? Yeah, don't be
Which is what
running down
happens. People
all
people
the
don't
time.
really, they're not really
Nobody
interested.
cares.
Karen is laughing
No.
because it's so true. People say, so how are you doing? And before you can even find, even if you wanted to say I'm great, they're gone. They're gone. They're not really interested, Jolene.
Nope. No,
Well, not
they're not
everybody, not
interested. They're
everybody,
not.
but
Not really.
everybody's busy. So
Mm.
yeah. Okay, Karen, what do you want to tell our
Yeah.
viewers?
What I would say is, while suicide is a growing concern, it's important to remember that it is preventable. And a lot of persons who commit suicide, they do show warning signs prior, but you really have to pay attention to those warning signs. So I would also say, or I would also encourage persons to be vigilant, be vigilant, extend that duty of care to persons around you, help a person, ask people how they're doing, be kind, listen to them, give them your ear. Connection is really important for persons struggling with suicidal thoughts. And so I think that if persons can pay attention and really be kind, and as Jolene said, take the time to listen to what people are going through,
Mhm.
um, that we could actually work towards preventing some of these suicides from actually happening.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I would add listening without judging, because people can
Exactly.
tell from
Yeah.
your answer, how you're judging them. So, Karen, can you tell us a little bit about what services you offer and how people can reach you? I'm actually going to put it on the screen as well.
Sure, absolutely. So we do have a wellness clinic, and so
Mhm.
this would be for persons not necessarily dealing with substance abuse issues, but other issues as well. And so this would be the opportunity for persons to get the help that they need, to speak to a counselor, to address any challenges that they may be experiencing with our wellness clinic. And those persons can reach us on our hotline at 243-0038. That's also good for WhatsApp as well. And you can share what your concern is, and then we can move from there. But for the wellness clinic, that would be a great opportunity for persons if they want to reach out and have a conversation, get paired with a counselor to address some of the challenges that they may be going through in life. And again, that number is 243-0038. It can also be used for WhatsApp.
Mhm. And Jolene, can you tell
Uh,
us about your services and how people can reach
all right, so 246 King Consulting offers employee health and well-being programs. So we can design programs and strategies for organizations, also provide mental health training and train mental health champions as well.
you? Hmm.
Create absence management programs for those companies that just don't have the resources or know how to do it. And also, I am a mental health specialist. So if you need someone within your, you need to discuss topics like suicide, anxiety, mental health in the workplace, stress, and so forth. Those are services that I can provide as well. I can be reached on my website, 246king.com. Email address is jking at 246king.com. LinkedIn, put in Jolene King, you will find me, and the Facebook business page is 246 King Consulting.
Thank you very much. Everybody, when you go over to Jolene's spaces, we plan to stay there for a while. She does so many things and she's so skilled, and Karen is as well. And I'm very grateful that both of you decided to accept my invitation to come on and share your thoughts on suicide, especially based on the increased rate in Barbados and the Caribbean on a whole. I'm going to invite anybody watching to connect with us. We are, as Jolene and Karen said, we are on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, wherever, your space is, we're there as well. And what we thought we would do specifically today is invite you to join the community and create like a mailing list where, as we have events like these offline, you would get notified and you'd be able to participate in any, Zoom webinars, any upcoming anything. You'll be able to be a part of that. So we'll put the link to the Google form for you to sign up in the chat comments afterwards. Ladies, I want to thank you. Any one last words before I say bye?
Just for everybody to pay attention and be kind, and
Hmm.
let's work together to break the stigma.
Agreed. Karen?
I like that. Most definitely, if you are someone you know is struggling, try to get help. You know, there is help available there, and you certainly do not have to go through it alone. So certainly, if you, as I said, or someone else you know is struggling, reach out. There is help.
Thanks, ladies. And we will be back again for another conversation. Thank you very, very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.